guys, we're here to invite you to an exciting webinar on March 3rd at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join me, Charles Gardner, and Ellie and Nancy and Grimm and Ethan. And I will just say, just to set this up, I've spent 25 years in public health and global health. And in that time, I've worked with a lot of researchers and a lot of advocates. I can tell you, when things are not progressing, when in the advocacy space in health, people get burned out. And so this is a universal phenomenon. We're going to focus on advocacy issues and frustrations and how to deal with them in the harm reduction space. And that includes drug harm reduction as well as tobacco harm reduction. I'm relatively new to tobacco control and tobacco harm reduction. Ethan Nadelmann will be joining us, and he's not new to the drug harm reduction space. We'll have views from others as well, and it's, I think it's going to be a lively discussion with questions and including live questions from the audience. Let's not forget that illicit drugs actually kill people, and harm reduction is a way to save lives. Legal tobacco products kill people, including, well, in fact, 8 million human beings every year. So harm reduction is a human right, it's a social justice issue, and we're going to address some of those issues as we soldier on.
You want me to jump in on that? Because, can you hear me, by the way? Okay, because harm reduction, in that it kills about 8 million a year. That's approximately 19,000 something a day. And that means for that to be sustained, which it is, means approximately 19,000 people smoke that very cigarette today. That dooms them, no matter what they do tomorrow. So we are talking, this is a temporality issue as well. Stopping now is infinitely better than stopping later on. And that adds to the frustration that seems to be like an academic oddity in a lot of the discussions that we kind of follow from the sidelines.
So this is Adekon Befritz, and a great advocate. And what he's saying is really true. I mean, my father died of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease after smoking 2 packs a day for most of his life. Almost all of us in the tobacco control harm reduction field know someone, we have loved ones who've died from smoking. We're not big fans of the tobacco industry, though we are often accused of working for that industry. And so, but there are 98 million of us. So there are
successfully ex-smoking users of safer nicotine products.
Million who are using safer nicotine products. Not all of them will have quit smoking completely, I would guess, or quit using other toxic forms of tobacco. But it's fair to say most of them have. And the others are on the journey. So there's something called the smoker's journey, where the smoker is testing out safer alternatives. Many of us have actually, in fact, up to 40% of us have quit smoking by accident, so they claim, and because they picked up an e-cigarette. But those are not the only safer alternatives to smoking.
Oh, no.
And those include nicotine patches and nicotine gum and nicotine lozenges.
And snus cans.
Snus, and nicotine pouches, and nicotine vapes, and heat not burn products. And in fact, the more variety, but anyway, so this is proselytizing, this is not the point here. The point is to talk about advocates and something that we all face. And what we all face is in in the face of mounting frustrations and always 2 steps forward and 1 step back, progress and a kickback. So not that kind of kickback, and being kicked back.
And I'm being kicked back. Yeah, and that is.
And most of the advocates in this space, they're not being paid.
No.
They're unpaid volunteers. Oh, because I quit smoking with a safer alternative and my health improved dramatically, so I would like to help other people save their lives. Well, how many years can you keep doing that with no pay? Because you feel that energy, you feel that enthusiasm, you feel that chemistry to help save other people's lives. But when you're faced with mounting resistance and misinformation in the field. Now, there are a lot of similarities between the drug harm reduction space and the tobacco harm reduction space, but there are also quite a few differences. So we try to learn from each other.
Yep.
Sorry, Atakan.
And try to educate, because that is basically the weapon that most of the unpaid advocates around the world have at their disposal, is truth. All you can do is bring out the truth and hope that that's going to be enough. And when it isn't enough, it gets incredibly frustrating. I've seen too many fall by the wayside along my 15 years of doing this, because there is nothing more in the toolbox to bring than truth. Whereas from the other side, that also get frustrated when the tobacco industry continues to be so successful as it is, because people actually like smoking a lot, is they can bring out the bigger guns. They bring out the bigger guns, and those get pointed very much at us and our constituency and the nicotine users around the globe that are almost bona fide proxies for the real enemy, which is smoking-related disease.
So Atakan is a former smoker. So Atakan, you want to tell us about how you quit smoking?
But I come from a 100% pack a day smoking family. We had four people smoking at least a pack a day. I started smoking when I went to boarding school. I was 12 or 13, and now.
Your father was a smoker?
Oh, all four of us. My brother and my father and my mother, all of us.
But
none of us are.
He's not smoking now, right?
No, none of us are. So we have three people who quit using assisted methodology with nicotine, and we have one who's got enough oomph to just quit. And that was my brother. Everybody else, the ones who used nicotine, two of us used non-pharma, i.e. snus, and then my mother used nicotine tablets for 25 years, and then she realized much better punch in the pouches, in the nicotine pouches. So she switched after 25 years from Nicorette to Zyn. She was like, this is what you want.
Okay, and not the
possibly Zyn. Sometimes Zyn. Depends on what's on sale.
All right. I mean, we could run through the safer nicotine superhero questions. I think the key thing is we have a great lineup. We've got a huge audience of more than 650 people who have registered, and we welcome you all and your questions. There will be opportunities for some people in the audience to be able to ask live questions with video images, but there will be we'll be monitoring the chat questions as well, and we'll each say our piece. But we're really dealing with a universal concept in the nonprofit advocacy space, and even not just in the health advocacy space, but people advocating for human rights and social justice and LGBTQ rights and so on. So this is kind of a universal issue. because advocates are often up against big moneyed interests, as are we. As are we.
Can I ask you, since you have been in around a lot of areas as well of health, public health, would you say that harm reduction generally has as a trait is that it doesn't cost the government or the taxpayer very much money or any money at all?
Yeah, I mean, so condoms are an interesting one because I used to do a lot of work on HIV/AIDS, and to a lesser extent on sexually transmitted disease prevention, right? So prevent HIV, and encouraging condom use, and condoms are a harm reduction product, but they're not made by government; they're made by commercial companies. So how do you get?
I bought a fair amount in my days.
And so how do you get people to use them? And they're also somewhat useful in preventing unwanted pregnancy. And so a lot of research went into, in low and middle income countries, went into encouraging condom use. And there were a lot of programs that just handed out free condoms, which turned out to be used and sold on street corners as balloons. People would just blow them up and sell them to kids as balloons. And so one of the lessons that was learned is the need for social marketing, so that condoms could be sold at a price, but at a subsidized price, because that's what you want to do with harm reduction products. You want to increase their access by lowering the cost and making them more affordable to people, especially low-income people. And in that case, so when a price was attached to condoms, they had value, and more people purchased them and used them for the proper use, rather than as inflating them as balloons. That was a big lesson for global health, because the assumption initially was profit is evil, and that we just need to obviously people will use them if we just give them away for free. Well, they didn't. And it's also interesting because, when I supported organizations that promoted condoms, nobody ever accused me of working for Big Condom. And now I support every option for smokers to quit, and somehow that paints a target on my back, as if I were working for an industry that I don't really like. So there's a lot of slander, there's a lot of ad hominem in this field, there's a lot of misinformation. And in the drug harm reduction space, a lot of very similar things happen, but the enemy there is very different. So it's drug cartels, right? They're a little harder to find. They're not listed on the New York Stock Exchange.
They will be. They will be pretty soon, and we actually might see a situation. In theory, if it goes, if everything goes as badly as possible, you will actually have the Sinaloa cartel on the New York Stock Exchange, and you will have us and Altria and the others, basically taking over for the Sinaloa in Sinaloa, I suppose.
You might need to explain that, because that could be taken the wrong way.
Right, but we're seeing an increase in banning nicotine products, and we're seeing a massive increase in legalizing the illicits. So basically, what we might see is, in some markets at least, actually these two trading places.
Hey, Janet. Yeah, so Janet, we're live. So one of the lessons here is, and this is universal in the field of drug and nicotine's a drug. Let's be honest. Of drug harm reduction, is that when you prohibit things, just think of American alcohol prohibition in the 1920s. The prohibition doesn't make them go away. It makes them go underground, where they are very often manufactured with less safe practices and where they are universally sold with no age checks. So when you have, in the case of nicotine, for example, 1.3 billion people on Earth using this mildly psychoactive substance, prohibiting it will send it underground. It will not make it go away.
I saw a number in Geneva in 2019 that there were approximately 229 million people that had used some form of illicit drug in the last 12 months. So 229 million compared to 1.3 billion. And of the drug users, some calculate that up towards 95% is non-problematic. So it's not really, there are not that many people that you see in a very, very bad position or in a bad place in their lives out in the street. But smokers, you get almost 50% that kind of end up in an early body bag rather nastily. And that's a lot more. It's massively bigger.
Yeah, I mean, people have used drugs, including, and alcohol is a drug too, for tens of thousands of years. Let's just face it. And one of the things that always shocked me talking to people in the drug harm reduction space was that the thing I heard over and over again with absolute assurance and certainty: you have no idea how many people are out there who are functional drug users, including heroin injection heroin users, who are working on Wall Street, who are working in the high-level banking firms and professional jobs, including medicine and high-powered lawyers. And so we this is like, once you make it illegal, it just doesn't make it go away.
And I would say it makes it worse.
But what we need is safer alternatives. Safer alternatives for the people using these substances if they want to switch over to something that's safer for their health.
And that should be a universal principle.
It is a human right. It is a social justice issue. I mean, just on the tobacco control side, in countries like the United States or the UK, where and Advocacy can speak to the situation in Sweden, which is actually quite different, but an even more positive story, frankly. But in the US and the UK, where we're down to about 14% of the population who is using traditional cigarettes, who's smoking cigarettes, almost all of that population now, it's 34 million people in the United States. It's not a small number. Almost all of them now are invisible, right? So people think that we've solved the smoking problem. It's just gone away, but it's still killing 480,000 Americans every single year. It's more than COVID-19. It's more than COVID-19. But that population is almost by definition the people who are least able or least willing to quit. And it turns out those are predominantly people who are low income or adults living with mental health issues, or indigenous peoples, or people in the LGBTQ community, or people who use illicit substances. So there's an overlap with the drug using community, or people who are homeless. It's basically everybody you can think of who is in a vulnerable community, who is already stressed out and already stigmatized for that. And now we have a field of tobacco control that literally and deliberately uses stigma as a tactic. I think it's the only field of public health that does that. And so they're doubly stigmatized if they smoke. And then it should be no surprise that that many people in those communities are now shifting over to safer nicotine alternatives. And so shall we stigmatize them for that too, for saving their own lives by switching to safer alternatives? These issues are, they're with us in our community. They're with us daily, but the public is largely ignorant, or that's an offensive word. The public is largely unaware.
Uninformed, unaware.
What is really going on in this space? I can assure anybody who is not inside our echo chamber that whatever you think is really going on in the tobacco control field is not what is really going on in the tobacco control space.
Correct. So let's hope we can add a little bit to getting people to last a bit longer in our space before they burn out, or hopefully don't burn out at all.
Yeah, so advocacy burnout is an issue for people in the tobacco control advocacy space, those of us who think that harm reduction might be a good idea, because some people have been doing this for 10 or more years, and with no pay, and that's a challenge. That's a challenge when it seems that we're actually going backwards, when the number of smokers in the population who are misinformed about their relative risks is actually increasing, even though the scientific evidence is increasing in the other direction.
Absolutely.
Advocacy, why don't you tell us about the story of Sweden? Why does Sweden have the lowest smoking rates in the entire European Union? I was going to say
basically in the entire Western world, I would say.
Western world.
So we're almost down to 5%, which is the WHO recognized non-smoking goal. That's the best we can do, but of course it isn't. So now the goalposts have shifted in Sweden to elimination of all forms of nicotine instead. What happened was we have a damp and cold climate, so we started using tobacco, powdered nasal snuff tobacco with water and salt to keep it from going bad 350 years ago. And that was the predominant product all the way until cigarettes came on the market in 1920, and by 1970 we were peaking with cigarettes, and male lung cancer was just going through the roof. Women came about a decade after that. Men predominantly started going back to this trusted age-old traditional pickled tobacco product that we had been using, and people stopped getting sick.
But then
people just stopped getting sick.
But then a new standard was developed in Sweden.
A new standard was developed. It's called Tech. And that is to keep the toxicants at a minimal level, pretty much preferably almost all the way down to zero. But we are still talking about by an order of magnitude below what's really a public health issue, or it should be a public health issue. So we've done a lot of tests here in Sweden. I've done tests where you can, by following a few simple rules, you can actually produce perfectly functional stuff in DIY in your own kitchen that is not as good as what the big factories produce, but it's way below anything that's worrisome, and it's many orders of magnitude below what you get from smoking. Sure.
So we're talking about an oral smokeless tobacco now called
Yes.
snus, which is taking off in the United States, and which, by the way, the Food and Drug Administration has just authorized 8 snus products in the United States as basically as tobacco harm reduction products. They're authorized to tell the public that if you use this product instead of smoking, it will reduce your risks of all kinds of smoking-related diseases, which is just true.
Yes.
And it's true based on at least 40 years of epidemiological data, which Advocacy knows well. And the Swedes the Swedes track this data, and it's overwhelming. This this safety standard in Sweden means basically ultra low nitrosamines, and nitrosamines are a product of the fermentation process of tobacco that are like highly carcinogenic, and
Yes.
it just it doesn't have them. I mean, not at they're at homeopathic levels basically,
Yeah.
and so
And
but then you have this tendency in the field of tobacco control to say that all tobacco products are harmful. They're not
Oh.
equally harmful.
I have to cut in on that because Sweden and the United States actually have been playing a tag team game for the past 30 years at least, whereby new scare tactics against these smokeless products that are, industrially produced, they're good, they're high quality, they're low nitrosamine, they are low toxicant, they are low heavy metal, they're low in all of those things. But still, there has been scaremongering going on either side of the Atlantic, and the other side that actually has every opportunity and responsibility to, in peer review, for example, critique and say, no, that's not correct, and no, is not what we see happening in the Swedish population, right? We didn't do that. And that went back and forth, escalating the level of perceived harm because the other side didn't do their peer review properly and actually critiqued when there were problems with the science.
So Sweden has not only the lowest smoking rates in the among any high income country on earth. It also has, like, no surprise, the lowest rates of smoking related cancer, heart disease, and lung disease.
Tobacco related, yes, absolutely, because
Related.
yeah, because if you take any random number of tobacco users in most any European country, you take 100,000, and then you measure their disease levels, and you take Swedish random 100,000, you measure theirs, we will have half, because half of ours use snus instead. So then there's not all that much left to portion out.
All right, so but can we do an experiment, like look at other countries where snus use has increased more recently, like Iceland or Norway?
Yes, you can if you have a government that's amenable to that, and you have research coffers that are amenable to do that kind of research. And to the best of my knowledge,
What's happened to smoking rates in Iceland and Norway over the past couple of years?
oh, they're gone in youth. They're zero. They're even lower than Sweden.
Yeah, so I mean, there are a number of areas where in the field of tobacco control, the evidence is just like blasting you in the face.
Yes.
But where the so-called experts, apparently can't see it. It often seems to me like the emperor's new clothes, right?
Yes.
I can see the emperor's naked, but I'm dealing with experts who are admiring his finery.
Yes. The thinnest organza you can imagine.
Yeah. One of the things we didn't discuss with Jeff is how long this little discussion is going to go on.
We were actually kind of prodded a while ago that maybe we should consider wrapping it up a little bit.
Ah,
But we've been doing that now for about 5 minutes, so I think that's pretty good.
then I would compliment you. You're actually a real super good speaker, and we've got to get you in front of the camera more often.
Okay. Well, fine. Okay.
Yeah, no, true statement. Okay, let's wrap this up. Thank God. Because I just didn't know where we were going. But we're here to remind you that we have this wonderful webinar coming up. Join me and Nancy and Ellie and Grimm and Ethan Nadelmann and we're going to have an interesting discussion. God knows what's going to happen.
And
Let's see how we can help all advocates in the health space, not only avoid burnout, but become more effective.
yep. So join us, please.